Alright, so we've gone through the kind of boring stuff of just menus and icons and buttons and all of that, and you can watch that last video or not. We're just going to jump into making this look good now. And so, first thing is let's just kind of establish a base of what does it look like. So I'm going to hit render. I'm just hitting the render icon in the Renderman tool shelf. And this is what we're starting with. We're starting with a gray car with gray wheels on a gray floor in a black area. Let's make that a little bit more interesting, shall we? The first thing I want to do, when you don't have any lights in a scene, Maya just kind of gives you a default light setup that's basically just a sunlight. See, it's hard shadows. There's only one shadow, which generally means there's only one light. I did add this ground plane because it gives... sorry, I forgot where I was mid-thought. Something about lights and the light bouncing around. Oh, yes, I added this ground plane so the light has something to bounce off of, which you can't really tell right now. If we zoom in here, we can see there's a little bit of light bouncing off the ground on the underside of the car. But that's why that's there. But let's make this light a little bit more interesting. The way that I'm going to do that is I'm just going to do this through the shelf right here. So you see this little sun icon. If I right click on that, I can add a few different types of light. This daylight will allow me to, it'll turn the sky a color based on time of day, and you can actually specify time of day, and you can even specify month, which will affect how the light is, because in the real world, depending if it's January or June, the sun will be in a different position. But we're just going to do a dome light. And a dome light, if I zoom way out here, is this big giant sphere that you put an image on, and it uses that image to light the scene. Okay, it kind of takes that and it makes it emit light based on what is in the image. So right now, if we just hit render, and I'm just going to, with my it renderer selected, I'm going to hit R. You can see it just made things brighter, and it's because by default it's just white. But it is this nice, big, soft source. You can see that the shadows are no longer hard, and things just kind of look pleasant, I think is the best way to describe that. I'm going to hit escape to stop that render. I don't need it to go through its full 3-minute render there. But we can also apply an image, and Renderman Preset Browser has some preset images. It's got a Pixar atrium, if you want to look like this car is in the middle of the Pixar atrium, or it's got 3 different outdoor scenes that all look slightly different. And again, to get to this preset browser, you can either click on this icon right here, or you can go to the Renderman menu and preset browser. I'm going to choose an outdoor. Let's choose. Actually, no, I lied. I'm going to do the indoor one. I haven't done the indoor one. So Pixar atrium with the dome light selected. I'm going to right click on Pixar atrium and import. It's going to apply that Pixar atrium image to the dome light. So now, if I render without doing anything else, let's hit R to re-render. Now we've got some color in our image. And we've got kind of this warmth coming from one side, and we've got the cool coming from the other side. If we move around in our scene, you can kind of see it's pulling the cooler colors from up here, and it's pulling the warmth, and it's less light coming from the shadows over there. If I go to an outdoor rig, let's say Luxo Junior, and import that instead, and then I jump back to my it renderer, hit escape, and then re-render, R to re-render, you see the light changes, and now it feels like it's an outdoor scene. If you want to see the image in the render, you can do that too. First, I'm going to zoom in here because I'm way too far away. Okay. So if you want to see that render, with the dome light selected, I'm going to go to my attribute editor. And you can see now I have an intensity slider, I have an exposure slider, color map. So this is where you plug that in. This image is called an equirectangular. And just as a side note, so you can find additional images. This is a Creative Commons search, which allows you to search open source images and other things. But the word equirectangular, there we go. And then if I search Flickr for that, you'll find a bunch of these sorts of images that are all open source, free to use, and whatnot. But that's what that image is that's applied. It's just one of the presets. Now, if we go to visibility, we can turn on camera visibility. And now if I hit render, we will see it render with the background there. We can also adjust the kind of exposure of the light. So if we wanted to add more light to the scene, we can increase that. If we wanted to add less, we can decrease that. You can use one of these to establish the ambient light and then add a couple of extra lights too if you wanted a special effect or a rim light or a highlight or something like that. While that renders over there, just if you hover over these, you'll get a tooltip. So intensity, specify the intensity of the light source linearly, which basically means if you bring the intensity from 1 to 0.5, it's going to cut the intensity by a half. Exposure is a longer tooltip. Specify the intensity of the light source as a power of 2 in stops. So increasing exposure by 1 will double the energy emitted by the light source. A value of 0 produces an intensity of 1. A value of -1 produces half. You may wonder why you might use exposure, and the answer is that real-world lighting has high energies and typical exposures are low values, or you may have to type in a really large number for equivalent intensity. It's also comfortable to artists familiar with photographic measurements. That's a whole lot of words. If you're not familiar with photography, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Basically, exposure behaves in a more natural way to photographers. So the way light in the real world behaves is as you move up an f-stop with the camera, the light doubles or moves in half. So an f-stop going from f4 to f5.6 is doubling the amount of light or halving the amount of light, depending on exactly what it is that you're measuring. And that's why you have this exposure slider. So if I go from 1 to 2, I'm doubling the amount of light on the scene. If I go from 2 to 3, I'm doubling that again. So that's how that all behaves, and you can certainly play around with those sliders at as much as you want. But that's our environment, and it's lit, and I actually quite like how that looks. So I'm going to go with it. I'm also going to take a quick little detour here, and I'm going to jump into my side view, and I'm going to click and drag and select everything. Assuming I don't have the, I don't want the dome light selected. There we go. And I'm going to move it down just so the tires are actually sitting on the ground. It's a minor thing, but it's bugging me. And I don't like it. Okay. That's better. So that's the environment. So now let's figure out some materials for the car itself. And I think the most obvious one is going to be the car body. So let's start with that. And so the way that this is going to work is in a similar way to the way we just did the dome light. So I'm going to select the car body. And I'm going to go to my Renderman Preset Browser, which that tab is still open here on the side. And I'm going to choose for the car body a metallic paint. And I think we'll do a glossy metallic paint. I don't think there's really anything in the regular paint that I want. No, so we're going to do, a glossy metallic paint. And I think we'll do... in the preset browser, you can click the plus and the minus magnifying glass to change the size of your icons. I don't think I can get any larger than that, can I? No, I can't. think I'm going to do... Yeah, we'll just do the blue metallic paint. So I'm going to right click and import and assign to selected. And then I'm going to go to my attribute editor. And if I click on this arrow over here, I can go to the side and I got blue metallic paint. And this is where I can change the color. I can also get to it through the Hypershade editor, which is your normal material editor that you would have in Maya. And you get to that by clicking this icon right up here. This little kind of Death Star blue eyeball looking icon. You can also get to it by going to the Windows, Rendering Editors, and Hypershade. Okay, so in here, similar sort of thing. We've got a material viewer, which lets you preview the material. You can set that to Renderman, so it's using the correct engine to preview it. You can also give it a base kind of color, so you can see how it looks like in various lighting situations. But here we can name it. So we're going to say car underscore paint is what the name of this is going to be. And then I can set my color. Now, being that this is modeled off of a Ferrari, it almost has to be red. So I'm going to move the hue slider over into red. Bring up the saturation. Bring up the value, and that is orange. So let's make it more red. Something like that I think will work. Now, that was just the diffuse color, and the way that this metallic paint is constructed is you also need to change the face and the edge colors here. So I'm going to also grab this red for that, and for the edge color, I'll give it the same red in my history. And now we've got this nice red metallic paint. Okay, I can go back to my image window and hit R to render again and see what it looks like. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now, one little tweak that I might want to make is I think this needs to be a little bit more reflective. So I've got this roughness slider here. I'm going to bring that roughness down. I think that'll be good. So I'm going to hit escape and hit R to render again. You can see now it's shinier, and I think I went too far. So I'm going to just, can I undo? Yep. So let's go maybe 1.8. And render again. Okay, I think that looks all right for now. These are just kind of base colors. We can go back and we can modify these more later. But I'm just worrying about presets because it's a great way to get a feel for how everything is going to look. And again, I can look through my my catalog here and kind of see which versions I liked. So this was when the roughness was at about 0.3. This is about 0.2, and this is about 0.1. So while that kind of finishes its thing, that probably needs to be, yeah, again, it's all right for now. Let's tackle the tires. And I'm just going to worry about one tire for now. We can worry about the rest later because that's just going to be a rinse and repeat sort of operation. So I'm going to move the Hypershade out of the way. I'm just going to select a tire. And the first thing I want to define is just the overall rubber tire. Now, this object also includes the axle on the back side. I will deal with that later. For now, let's just make everything a black rubber. So we've gone through the preset browser. We're going to do the same thing again. So I'm going to go to Renderman Preset Browser. And down at the bottom here, we have rubber. And then we've got a few different options. We've got a blue matte rubber. We have a green latex. Neoprene rubber, pure rubber, and violet rubber. Neoprene is like a like a wetsuit. I'm going to go with a pure rubber. Okay. So I'm going to right click on it and import and assign to selected. It slightly changes the color of my tire, but that's not a tire color. So we need to modify that preset again. So I'm going to jump back into my Hypershade view. I'm going to name this. I'm going to name this tire rubber. And now the color is what I want to affect. And I'm also going to turn off my exterior color here. So I'm going to set the color to a mostly desaturated, mostly dark color. Okay, I'm not going to go completely black. And I'm not going to go completely white on anything either. I'm going to keep it right about there, I think is pretty good. If you go completely black, then you're not going to see any detail. So you want to bring it up, and nothing in real life is completely black anyway, unless you're dealing with like new material science in a lab at MIT or something like that, where they've actually made a very, very, very black material. But as far as we're concerned, the answer to the question, how much more black can it be, should always be some more black. Okay, so I've got that. And let's update our render and see what it looks like. Now, if you're noticing these render times kind of starting to creep up, I'm at now 4 and 5 minutes for a finished render. So in an effort to kind of stem that a little bit, I'm going to open up my render settings, which is right here. Okay, we can cancel that render. And in my render settings, I'm going to first change my preset size. We can go 640 by 480 will be fine. And I'm also going to change the sampling from 512 down to 128. Let's do a test render there. I can also go to View and Resize Window to Fit Image. That's better. Let's see how long that takes to render. It only took 35 seconds, which is much more reasonable than 6 minutes for demonstration purposes. You still get a good sense of what the material is. All right, so that is the overall material. The next thing I want to do is I want to make the rim color. And for this, you can apply a second material to the same object. And so let's do that now. To do this, I'm going to go into face mode on my wheel, and I'm going to select a face loop. One of the interior ones. I don't want to be all the way out by the rim, but one of these towards the center will be good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grow this selection. So I'm going to Command right click, and I'm going to select Grow Selection. That's Command right click. On Windows, I would assume that would be a Control right click. But Command right click, Grow Selection, and you can see that it now has selected the face loops on either side of the initial one. And then if I hit G on the keyboard to repeat the last action, it will continue to grow my selection, which for me is the easiest way to select a bunch of concentric face loops. And I'm going to grow this selection. Let's see if I can figure out a way to make this legible, easy to see. I've got some rim kind of geometry created here, right in this area. So if I keep growing this, I think we're going to go to there. Okay. So all of this I want to be a chrome material. So once I have those faces selected, I'm going to go to my preset browser in the metal, and I've got a plain metal, and here is chrome, so I'm going to right click on that, import and assign to selected. If we deselect that, move our camera around a little bit, I'll jump back to our browser and hit R, we can see how the chrome looks. And I think that looks pretty cool. What I want to do for this wheel, actually it's not the last thing. I always say it's the last thing, and it's never the last thing. But the next thing that I want to do for this wheel is I'm a fan of white-walled tires. So I'm going to give these tires a white wall. I'm going to select this face loop, this face loop, and this face loop. I'm going to grow the selection, I'm going to grow the selection once. I think just once. Yes, just once. And I'm going to apply a rubber, and I think we will do I think this violet rubber gives me just the hint of glossiness that I want. So I'm going to choose that, import and assign to selected, and it's going to look terrible for a second until I go into my Hypershade editor and I select this violet rubber. I'm going to rename it to tire underscore white underscore wall, and I'm going to change that color, completely desaturate it, and then I'm also going to increase the value so it's mostly white. Not all the way, but mostly. Okay, and now I'm going to hit render, and we'll see what that looks like. Yep, I think that might be just a little bit too white.
Yeah.
It's close. Yeah, we can still get some detail in there. I think that might be just a little bit too much though. So I'm going to, just back in my Hypershade, I'm just going to bring that slider down just a little bit. And I'll hit render. Again, is the process for applying preset Renderman materials to your objects, your models, and that'll get you quite a long way, as you can see. That's looking pretty good. Select your preset, apply it, and then you can jump into the Hypershade. It's always good to name things. So like this chrome, I should actually probably call wheel chrome, just so I know. It's always good to name things early and often. So it would be the same process to apply this to the rest of the car. For this axle in here, I probably need to, I'm going to grow the selection a couple times, and I'm just going to apply, if I go to my metals, I've got this black oxidized steel, which will just make it dark and look better for if I ever see that angle. But it's the same process for the rest of the car. Just kind of choose what materials you want, make little tweaks here and there. You'll get to a pretty good place pretty quickly. That's all I want to cover for presets right now. I think I will either in a little bit or next week we'll talk about cameras and lights, but that's all I really wanted to cover for presets. Just keep it simple and let you run with it. Note, just as a workflow thing, is once you already have the materials established, you don't have to recreate the rubber for every tire. If you right click on an object and go down to assign existing material, this is another reason why naming is important. I can go to tire rubber and quickly apply that material. Assign existing material and tire rubber. And then I do need to go back and apply the other textures, or materials, excuse me.